Great. All right, now we're live. Yeah, you can hear it? No one could hear me before. Okay, so we did research. We did research at a few different levels. Some people went out and spoke to people. Some people sent out some surveys. Some of you actually went directly and spoke to your users in their actual work environment, which was awesome. So what I want to cover today is what we're going to do with all that information. So we're going to do a quick recap on our process. We're going to talk about synthesizing your research, specifically around affinity maps, personas, and user journeys. Has anyone heard of any of these terms before? Kind of. Which ones? Personas? Okay, cool. We're going to cover the fundamentals of them really quickly, and then we're going to do an exercise with empathy mapping. So just as a reminder, did everyone forget about the double diamond? Did everyone kind of refer to it? I want to cover it, make sure we all remember the thing that we mentioned. Again, a design thinking framework or methodology with the idea that we're trying to figure out or making sure that we design the right thing early on, which is foundational in the research that we did, and then the synthesis that we're going to speak about today. So research, synthesis, ideation, deliver. You guys did this piece. Some people probably need to do a little more research and go back. We're going to talk about how to synthesize this information. So you guys are going to walk away from here today either doing more research, taking the research that you had, and synthesizing it and getting to a redefined problem statement. Some of you already have a redefined problem statement. That's totally great and awesome. That may change after you do some of the synthesis. What you guys are going to do after this session, or basically starting the next session, is starting to move into the ideation phase. Some of you have already gotten to that point, which is also great. Just a reminder, this is a framework and it's flexible. You don't have to adhere to every single step in this. Most importantly, you just want to make sure that you understand that you want to design the right thing and then design that thing correctly. These are going to be in the PDF for you guys to look at. Again, it's a recap of these stages. We're going to talk about synthesis today, and then redefining problem statement you guys are going to have in this deck as well, and then the ideation phase. Just to give everyone a heads up, again, we're going to go through this very fast. We're going to speak a little bit at the end of the session about what we can do between now and the next session. If anybody has any questions or wants to speak about how to actually execute against any of these tactics, we'll be available to speak with you guys and try to walk you through. Ideally, we'd be able to do maybe 3 workshops or 3 little activities in this lesson. We just don't have enough time to do it today. Okay. So what do we do with, how do we synthesize? Step 1, we want to create an affinity map or an affinity diagram. We're going to talk about what that is. We're going to really chock full those with I statements. We'll cover what those are. Step 2 is to create personas to represent a person from each of our affinity groupings. Flesh out your personas using relevant details from your interviews. So again, this is going to be a method that we're going to take all of our findings, plot them on some sort of wall or a book or somewhere. We're going to create groupings of those which are going to form personas. We'll then prioritize those personas. So you guys probably spoke to or interviewed or surveyed a bunch of folks. Not all of them are going to be your primary target. Some of those people are going to be edge cases, so we're going to speak about prioritizing those people. We're going to keep validating those personas, and then most importantly, we are going to speak about user journeys. User journeys is one of my favorite things to do when working on products, projects, or anything. Really just my daily life, honestly. Putting together a user journey is going to be incredibly valuable for you guys to be able to tell that story about what you're doing and to pitch your overall project when it comes to pitch. And that's going to be covered in a lot more detail after I'm done here. Okay. So, affinity diagrams. I'm going to stop reading and ask you guys to pick up some of these slides. Andrew, right? Yeah. Can you pick this up for me?
Affinity diagrams. Write down one observation per post-it note. Make sure they are specific and relevant. Use quotes, behaviors, likes, and dislikes. Place observations into groupings based on similarities and trends. Redefine and rename your groupings as many times as needed until the insights emerges. Summarize.
Go for it.
Summarize each insight using an I statement.
Okay, so this particular activity is a messy activity. You guys spoke to a lot of people. You got a lot of information. The point of this is to try to take every single little bit that you heard and turn it into an I statement. So I need lights to be able to see in the tunnel. That's why this product is really important for me. I need protection from my knees or for my feet because a manhole cover might fall on my foot for Con Edison. I don't know, something like that. So there are going to be I statements that you would have heard when you've spoken to all of these people or received your responses from your surveys. That's going to be the most important thing. Get all these I statements together, and those are going to be representative of the needs and the wants of your users. Make sure they're specific and relevant. So you're gonna have to sift through everything that you heard and just pull out all those little key insights. Once you've done that, you're gonna essentially have this huge pile of I statements, and then you got to figure out, well, how am I going to make sense of all of these things? Design thinking, design in general, is a messy process. You know, we have to figure out how to push through ambiguity, and this is one of the best tools to be able to do that. Start looking at all of the things that you found and start trying to identify patterns. The first pattern you identify may not be the best one, and you're going to have to redo those groupings, those patterns, until you actually start seeing something come together. This is one of the things that I would spend probably about an hour going over and practicing. I suggest you guys do a little bit of reading on affinity mapping and affinity diagram post this lesson. So again, it's a way to identify patterns in qualitative data. You guys spoke to a bunch of people, as we mentioned, and that's all qualitative information. This is a real-life example of what those things look like. Bunch of Post-its on a wall, super messy. We're going to put them up, use a whiteboard marker, say, oh, these things kind of like seem like they make sense together. A couple of important notes on this. Post-it note etiquette. When you're working with a group of folks with Post-its, you want to be able to see those things far away from an actual whiteboard so you can step back and look at the bigger picture. So make sure that you write with Sharpies only. Only one observation per Post-it. I've seen folks do like 4 things per Post-it. That makes it really difficult to move things around and start bucketing things into appropriate groupings. So only in Sharpie, 1 per Post-it. Write in all caps. It's easier to read when you're kind of stepping back. Color code observations by interviewee. This is really important, and I'll get to that in a minute. So if you interviewed 5 people, 6 people, 7 people, 8 people, just make sure that there's an easy way to identify which of the I statements came from which user. This essentially will help us or prevent us from designing a product for one person, which is really important. We want to be able to get a grouping of people that we want to design things for. So we're going to look at an example here. An example from Blue Apron. Let's imagine that this general theme was, I don't cook as often as I'd like. We need to really dig into that statement, and hopefully we've done that through our research, and we should have some whys. If this came up, you'd ask open-ended questions. You'd have a lot more information that comes in after this. And what that might look like is one grouping that basically is surrounded around the theme of needing to save money. In this, we can start putting together, start identifying the people that we spoke to. Maybe they were college students, maybe they were recent grads, maybe they're just typically younger people. Another answer to that overall question may be, I don't have time to shop / cook. So that might be another theme that we're seeing in all of the I statements that we have. And we'll want to essentially create a grouping around that. And that might be a busy mom, that might be a college student again, it might be a young professional. So this is all dependent on the people that we spoke to, and we want to take those I statements, match them up with the people that we found, and see if there's any commonality between those folks. Then we might have someone that's just concerned about healthy eating habits, and that might be because they're on a restricted diet. One thing that we're going to look at is this is one circled Post-it versus a grouping of circled Post-its. Health, not overweight, a bunch of things. So what you'll end up coming out with is something that looks like this. You'll have a couple of groupings, some of them larger, some of them smaller. You typically want to avoid anything that's like 1, and you want to avoid something that's like, if you have 20 Post-its and you have one group that's 1 and one group that's 19, you probably need to go back to the drawing board and figure out how to regroup some of those things. So you definitely want like a nice grouping of all of the information that you've gathered. Once we've done that, I'm going to stop there. Any questions on affinity mapping before I move on? When people do it for the first time, they're like, I don't understand. I feel like I'm doing this wrong. When you actually get in here, understand that affinity mapping, it's very difficult to do things incorrectly.
What if one of the things you learn could go in more than one group?
That's a great question. If a thing that you learned could go into more than one group, I might make multiple copies of that Post-it, make a note in my affinity map that it's a duplicate answer. I would also think a little bit about what my groupings are and potentially reorganize my groups if there's something that's just going across everywhere. It might be indicative of either A, needing to regroup your all of your buckets, B, maybe it's too high level of a comment that is that may not be valid. Those are two indications of something going wrong there. Great question. Okay, so we found all this stuff. We write all this stuff down on Post-its. We go through the messy process of putting it up and figuring out what are these clear buckets, and now we can get to the point where we start creating our personas. Essentially, those are affinity groups or representation of a group of people with similar interests, needs, and wants. That's what we want to start doing. We want to understand who it is that we're solving for, and we want to start prioritizing some of those things. So we're going to create our personas. Again, I'm going to, you want to read the screen for me?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Create personas. What are the groups that naturally form? What are their shared characteristics? Frequency of use, expertise, geography, not just demographic.
So there are different types of personas out in the world. There are marketing personas, and there are essentially experience personas or UX personas. What we really want to focus on are UX personas. Marketing personas tend to be purely demographic, and we want to make sure that we include more information about these, which are behaviors, all these things that are in here, frequency of use, expertise, more rich qualitative information that gets us to understand the overall person. So the sheets that you guys have, this is a very rudimentary template for what would be required to actually put together a persona. You would essentially give this person a name. Again, this is not any one individual person. At this point, it's likely a grouping of 4, 5, 6, maybe 10 different folks that you spoke to. That's where it's really important to make sure that you have color-coded Post-its so that you know that one large group of 10 is not just one person. That is a poor affinity map or grouping with an affinity mapping. You want to make sure that you have a good diversity of comments or essentially I statements. This would essentially be broken down into bio and demographics, so their biography and anything that's around who they are, where they live, what they do. That's very important context. Their behaviors, these are things that you would have heard. Some of those I statements are going to be behavior statements. Some of them are going to be need statements, and some of them are just going to be general goals. My goal is not to break my knee. My goal is not to get run over by a train. My goal is to get great barbecue. Whatever that thing is, you'll want to essentially categorize those into essentially larger buckets. Where I think most of you are today, so what's required to do this is a pretty good foundation of affinity mapping or something similar, and enough information that you could start filling out some of these buckets. The other thing you can do is, if you have assumptions on who your users are, start to put together an affinity map. An empathy map. So an empathy map essentially is documenting all of the things that your user is thinking. What are they thinking? What do they believe? What do they see? What do they say and do? And what do they hear? You guys have this in detail. Again, this is one of those things that I would like to actually do a full exercise on, and I think we will not have time to do it. We're going to actually skip that exercise and just move through the rest of the presentation. But you guys are more than welcome to do it afterwards. And if you guys need to connect and speak about this, we can do a post this lesson today. We were going to try it. We're not going to try it. This is going to be in a deck. You guys should try this. You should do it on your own. So individually sit down. If you have enough information to start putting personas together and you want to do some affinity mapping before you do it, go ahead and do that. If you don't and want to start working on an empathy map, do that. Work individually for 10 minutes, fill out the information. This is going to be your interpretation of the information that you received from your interviews and your research. And if you have more than one person on your team, then you can start figuring out where those things are overlapped and try to understand how to make sense of those things. 10 minutes to do it individually, 10 minutes to actually do it together and come to consensus. When you are done with your personas, so I have this whole spiel about personas. I think they're really important because they essentially ground a user, and when you're speaking about the people that you're designing for or you're creating this product for, it gives you a sense of, like, this is a real person that I'm solving problems for. In order to do that, it's usually a good idea to put pictures behind them, give them a name, give them their qualities, and tell a story about them. It's easier to empathize with that person. It's easier to tell a story about that person. And that's really important when you guys are going to be going out and pitching. One of the most important things is to choose the right type of photo. What type of photo do we think we want to use for a persona? Which one would you guys choose if you want to truly empathize with a real user? Who says A? Anyone say A? Anyone say B? Anyone say C? Oh, come on, no. Someone's got to be contradictory here. Yes, C is the thing you want to do. It's a real person. It feels like a real person. Not super stylized, not super stocky. The purpose of the persona is to fully empathize with their user and be able to communicate that and essentially get everyone else to empathize with your overall user and the problems that you're trying to solve. Prioritize your personas. You're going to have primary, secondary, and edge cases. Maybe you'll have primary, secondary, and tertiary personas. So remember that grouping that we had. This might be a great indication of edge cases. Edge cases, those problems we maybe not want to solve because they're going to be solving for a very small percentage of overall users. We're going to want to identify a primary and potentially secondary or tertiaries. Okay. Any questions so far? I've got 7 minutes. Fast.
It seems to be something that would almost redefine your whole design.
Oh yeah, I mean this is, so if you have gone through the process of already prototyping and designing, totally cool. It's great to get those assumptions, it's great to get those initial ideas out. It's the difference, there's always a balance between design thinking and design doing. If you've done the thing, get it out, do it, test it, hear from users. As you start getting research in, as you start understanding your users a little bit better, you begin to iterate on that overall product. So yeah, maybe this totally does redefine the product that you're building or making or designing or whatever it is that you're creating.
So it feels like this is the way to do it, this is a way to do it, but we have touched on it while we were discussing before.
Totally.
Like we came up with this 18 to 35 target. We talked about college students versus business people. So we kind of started this process.
That's awesome. If you guys just naturally started doing this, great instincts. I would say continue, learn a little bit more about the codification of these personas or archetypes. If anyone wants to really dive in, there's a big debate about personas and archetypes, which is just more information about how to put these things together.
What do you think that we should add to it? I mean, for me, demographics versus what questions should we ask more?
Great question. I'll show you what some real life personas look like. So I have 2 examples of personas that I've put together. This is more than typically is created for any one particular project. When I was at Reserve, we created personas for a bunch of restaurant folks. These were all mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive grouping of people that were using our product. It was 12 different personas. It's a lot. Usually don't have that many. But the information that we gathered about these people were all based on existing usage of our product. When we went out and interviewed folks, we fully understood their pains, their needs, their wants, and we put this together. Again, this is really good for alignment on a team, so that if you have 3 people working together, you're speaking all about the same person or the right type of person that you originally thought about. You guys are small right now, 3 people. When you start getting larger, when a design team becomes 10, when you're speaking to 50 people in an organization, this becomes increasingly more important. We use these personas to communicate across 10 different markets so that we basically were talking about the same person. We often had someone saying, oh no, you don't understand, this person has problem A, B, C, and D, and someone else would argue, that makes no sense. This other person has problem C, D, and E. So it was really important for us to prioritize our personas, understand who they were speaking about, when problems came up, and make sure that we were all aligned on what we were looking to do. So there's a lot of stuff here. I'm going to breeze through this. A name, picture, primary job role, a bunch of information about them, secondary job, their age, so we understood just to provide some context on what they were doing. Venue types, so we also created archetypes for restaurants. I won't be able to get into that today, but if you guys want to speak about that, we could probably do that over Facebook or something. The devices that they used, I covered that already. A story about the person and what they actually go through every single day is really important to be able to make a connection. Their needs, their pain points. For us in the restaurant world, when we were working on this, it was really important to understand at what point of the journey this person was impacting or using the overall product. There were different parts of that journey, and some people touched the product at certain parts and other people touched it at others. So that might be something that you would think about as well when putting personas together. Stats, this is more of like a just hot, cold, what they used, what they didn't use. Some venues on sophistication in terms of ability to run a restaurant, volume of the restaurant, pricing. And then this was a big thing that we put together for our markets so that they understood this type of persona lives in this type of restaurant. And it was just a really great way for everyone to come together.
So what were user pain points?
User pain points would be, this is the, it would depend on the project that you guys are working on. So a pain point for the MTA one or Con Ed would be my flashlight, I don't know. I'm making this up. I don't know. I hate carrying the flashlight. That's a pain point. That's a great example of a pain point. If it's strapped to my knees, now I have 2 open hands instead of 1 open hand. Cool.
Okay, so those are cons, essentially.
Yeah, like what makes my life difficult?
Okay, great.
Okay, we're going to just breeze through this. Another example of personas for another company. I just wrapped up a large research project for a company called TodayTix. Put a whole series of personas together for them as well. I'll actually read these. Alignment, onboarding for new team members, common language across teams. Those are the most important thing. Alignment and common language across teams also translates to a really easy way to pitch or get other people to understand what it is that you're designing and who you're designing it for. Okay, 2 minutes left. Just enough time to cover map out a user journey. Anyone heard of a user journey before? So if you have a story about a user, you understand what it is that they do, why they do it at work, their pain points, their needs, and their wants, then you want to map out the overall experience. What does it mean to use your product from the beginning to the end? And that, if it's a digital product, it's not just on a screen. It's what happens outside of the screen. If it's a physical product, it's not just when you're wearing it. It's where does it, where do you store it? How big is it? How often do you have to replace batteries? There's a life for all of our products outside of the individual use of it, and we need to be able to map that out. So typically that looks like this is a very simple one that I put together for Reserve. Essentially, it's a journey. There's like I'm happy, I'm sad. There are things that happen in there. Maybe we're including pain points. Maybe we're including failures of our existing products and things that we want to improve. We want to make sure that we fully map out a timeline and our emotional journey while we go through it. These are a couple of examples of it. Again, additional research that you guys should do post this to understand what these things look like. But the most important factors here are making sure that you, when you're doing this, when you're putting a user journey together, we were going to do this as an exercise, but we're not. So you want to take yourself out of any, if it's a restaurant, you don't want to think about the experience only in the restaurant. It's what happens when I decide to come to the restaurant? How do I get to the restaurant? Where is the location of the restaurant, or the physical products or a digital product? So the first thing you want to do is map out the entire journey, independent of the actual product itself. When do I decide to use it? When do I use it? When am I done using it? And does anything else happen at the end of it? Those would go on Post-its above a line. So journey outside of just the actual product itself. Then you want to go and map out the actual interactions that folks have with the product itself. So, I have to go to work. I get my, leg thing, use it at work. Then I have to put it away at work because I go to lunch. What is the entire journey from beginning to end, from the point that I decide to use this thing to the point that I'm done using this thing? So the next thing that you want to do is break down your overall journey. Try to bucket that overall journey. In this particular instance, there's a research, a discovery, a transaction, and a post-transaction phase. This might be like a typical transactional product. Maybe I'm making a reservation somewhere. Maybe I'm trying to purchase a smart thermostat for my home, or any type of typical checkout process, e-commerce type of thing. There'll be some sort of research, some sort of discovery, some sort of transaction, some sort of post-transaction. You guys are going to want to adapt this to whatever it is that you're using and whatever it is that you're creating. Lastly, document highlights and pain points throughout the overall journey. When is something going poorly? When is something going well? Make sure that you understand the emotional level of your user when they're going through using your product. And that essentially is an entire user journey. Yes. Okay, cool. That was a lot that we just covered in like 2 minutes. I'm 2 minutes over.
We'll get this also.
You guys are going to have this PDF. So the last thing that I would say is everything that we've covered here is in some way or another. Has anyone ever heard of a Google Design Sprint? So great reading to do. Google Ventures is an arm of Google. They put out this book that's called The Design Sprint. It's 1 week of work that you would do after you've done the synthesis work. So research, synthesis, you have all this information, and then you can start prototyping a bunch of stuff. This is the thing that you're going to want to do likely after the next session, but just a great resource for you guys to learn and read about. I'll take 2 minutes of questions.
So what kind of things should they focus on during the break before the next session?
Yeah, so let's talk about that. Ideally, let's go to,
And by the way, guys, the high-pitched noise I just checked on, they're going to be done in about 10 minutes. So after this, we'll have a break. By the time the break's done, that high-pitched noise will be done. Thank you for your patience with it.
I didn't even hear it. But now it's the only thing I can hear.
Yeah.
Okay, so you guys have done this research. How many of you feel like you need to do some additional research going into the next session? Cool. So I would definitely, if I were all of you, I would start putting some sort of action plan together. I've worked with people, I've worked with groups of people that have executed on a project from initial concept or just the kickoff to a full delivery of this entire process in 2 weeks. So it is possible. You just have to set up a schedule and actually push through it. So if you're going to do some additional research, time box yourself. Make sure that you get some of that research done really, really early on so you can move on to the next phase. Who's ready to go into synthesis, or who has not done synthesis but is ready to go to synthesis? Who's already done a bunch of synthesis? I know you guys have.
Yeah.
Who's like not even working on their project? Okay. If you haven't started synthesizing, or if you have, take a look at this as a resource and start going through all of the information, all of your findings, and start creating personas. It's going to be really valuable when you go out there and start pitching.
Good question. You said creating personas. That means we're making them up.
Great
based off
question.
the real information?
Good question.
Great question. Yes. So this is one of the things that I really dig into. You're essentially, you can make up personas. So the reality is that a lot of personas out there are fully made up. They're not founded on research. They're not based on facts. They're not based on anything that you've actually learned through your research. They're based on assumptions. And those are bad personas to do. So make sure that your personas are all fully backed up by research that you did. And you are synthesizing those your findings into personas. So they're people with similar interests, similar needs, similar wants, similar pain points that are then turning into essentially like a super person that is representative of a group of people.
So that user journey that you created was based off consumed user journeys from a bunch of people, correct?
Correct. So step 1, take all of your information, synthesize it. You're going to have a bunch of I statements. Step 2, take those I statements and bucket them into what could become a person. That essentially becomes a persona. Document a story behind that. Really empathize with that user. That is going to help you make decisions when you're designing your product or your service or your restaurant or whatever it is that you're designing. Step 3, redefine that problem statement if you guys haven't redefined it. I'm sure that there's going to be some changes after you do this work. And step 4, drop those personas into a journey. Fully understand how they actually use your product, service, restaurant, whatever it is that you have from beginning to end. That's going to position you in a great place to adjust that journey. You'll be able to understand, what is my product going to do to impact this overall journey? How am I going to alleviate pain points throughout this journey? And you should, at the end, see a change to that journey, a positive change, hopefully, to that journey. Not a bad thing to have a negative change on that journey as well, because then you've learned maybe something that you didn't do really well. That's what I would focus on before the next one. And on the next one, you guys should start moving towards like full ideation. If you are ready to do more ideation and actually start creating things before that, that would be fantastic. Cool.
So if we were going to script out a pitch for the
I think I'm gonna, I'll answer that for 2 seconds, but I'll mostly leave that to you. I'll speak about my experiences with it, and that's having a journey, having users. I want to tell people, what does my product do? What problem is it solving? Who is it solving it for? And how is it improving the existing scenario? And how did I come to those decisions sprinkled throughout there? I'm not just making this up. These are validated. There are reasons why we're doing these things. I'm not just guessing. That's typically the way that I would go through essentially a story. But I think we'll learn a lot more about how to appropriately put a pitch together right after this break.
Great.
In your examples of the personas, you have multiple. Is it okay, like, you start with 2 or?
Absolutely. So for context, the 12 personas that I showed, you should not have 12 personas. It's a very rare scenario where that is a thing. Restaurants are actually just incredibly complex, and it was important for us to do that. It was also based on about 2 months of research, like solid back-to-back research where we had a lot of different inputs. So wouldn't expect you guys to have 12 personas. I think it's perfectly acceptable to have like 2 folks that you're designing for, 3 folks that you're designing for. It all depends on the information that you get. But prioritize those personas. Super important. Cool. Okay.
Is it kind of okay to choose like 2 or 3 to focus on because we already know, or is it like going forward without the sentences?
So the question was, is it okay for us to choose 2 or 3 people that we want to focus on? The answer to that question is a complex one. Not super complex, but why are you choosing to focus on those people? Is it because you see the best of value that you can add to that group of people? Is it because there's more opportunity? Most importantly, there has to be business viability for whatever decisions you're making. So if I wanted to choose this one person that is an edge case because I am personally really invested in their problem, not a good thing to do. But if I'm focusing on like this one persona because it seemed to resonate with most folks and there's the most amount of opportunity and the most business upside to focus on that type of user, then that would be a good reason to go that way. Cool. Thank you, guys.